it's always a problem when you are the third speaker to introduce things, because there will be some duplication. Although whatever I offer is somewhat level of duplication from both Anna and Susanna's presentations, I focus that around the two projects. And my task today and this afternoon is to introduce the next speakers that will talk more in detail about the deliverables of the different working groups that have been operating under the last project. And the other thing I would like to actually mention, and I think that perhaps can get lost in translation, is that what Susanna predominantly was talking about is this huge effort from different sponsors that are actually contributing to the education and training in Europe. And so there was a pot of money, two pots of money actually, that made it possible to develop those e-modules. So we will not talk here about the development of those e-modules and what they contain. There was a separate two pots of money, and those are the two that I'm going to talk about. So that we get that straight, that we know what we are talking about, if that is not clear to everyone. So yes, thank you, and great to see you here. And what I would like to take you back is I take you back to 2017-18, and Susanna already had it on her slide. That was actually when we started talking about this first grant. And I always hate to do this, but I have to do it again, and that is to acknowledge Susanna's efforts on this topic. I've done it before, once, and I do it again. I think it is due to her initiative that we are sitting here today talking about harmonization of education and laboratory animal science in Europe. There would have been no other way of doing that if there hadn't been a person like Susanna propagating and stimulating this at the level where it was needed. Because, as we were said, education and training is at the competence of the member states. The member states don't have to do anything to harmonize it at all, unless there is some real reason, which is obviously mutual recognition and the free travel and the free movement of scientists across Europe. But you need some effort at the ground level, which is, in our case, in Brussels. And I think you've taken that opportunity, you've walked the fine line to actually make that possible. And that's also how this came into view. This is a funding scheme in Europe, which has actually three parts. And Susanna pointed us in the direction of that we at PLAS could be eligible for the first two parts of that, which is a pilot phase and an action phase. The third phase of this program is actually a legislative phase. And we are not allowed to go for that because, again, Europe cannot legislate on education. So we were very fortunate that we were actually given the opportunity to apply for this. So David Smith, Dominique and I, summer 2018, got together and filled in the application form. And this is how it all started. So in 2018, 2018, David was the chair of ETPLAS at that time, so there was a close collaboration with EC, and that has actually gone on since then. And in that first grant, we actually had Corona happening. So instead of 2 years, it became 2.5, 3 years. And then we finished that one, and then we could apply for the second grant, which happened, which came actually in 2022, and that takes us till today. So what this meeting is presentation of the deliverables, and at the same time it's the continuation of ETPLAS, as Anna has already alluded on. So the pilot grant objectives and the action grant objectives were very similar and very much in line of what both Susanna and Anna have presented, what is in the legislation and what is in the education and training framework as you know it. So it is to facilitate the process of mutual recognition, and it's also focused on certain functions that are mentioned in the directive. Now, Susanna has shown a much prettier picture of this similar document, but it's the Education Training Framework, which is dated 2014, actually, but it came out in 2013 as the replace, published in 2014. And you're all very aware of what's in there, I hope. And I'm going to show you now what the deliverables are and what we actually try to achieve with those projects actually really addresses the questions that are let's say the policies and the ideas that are in this document. Now they refer to both Articles 23 and 24 in the directive. I put them on just in case you haven't seen them before, but Susanna mentioned them as well, and they say something about what is needed. And in those days, I don't know whether you remember, but there was nothing the sort in the European Union. So this was the first really thing where education and training was taken seriously. We needed to be competent and knowledgeable. And we also needed to be retrained if we hadn't done certain things again. So very, very illustrative were these different images in that document. And I hope you all know them. And this one here actually is exactly what ETPLAS is. It puts together all these different stakeholders into one organization and put it center stage. And the next one talks all about how you train and how you assess competence. It's about training and it's about assessment. And that's exactly what we've been developing for you in those two projects. And that is where Ismina's group, working group 1, very much at the modular level, so not the courses, but the modular levels, and then looked at the learning outcomes and how do you actually assess whether people meet the learning outcomes? How do you do that and what do you need to do? And those has led to 2 publications that Ismina will probably talk about in her lecture after me. And then there is this whole thing about CPD. As I mentioned already, it was a very small piece. It's about half a page in this document. It will be many more pages and a significant contribution from Philippe's working group. So for me, it is ETPLAS at your service. ETPLAS is just there. We are there to actually give you all that material to work with. And it is the center stage, which actually will give you guidance on assessment criteria for learning outcomes. And they also present you, and that will be Nuno's presentation on also an online exam opportunity to harmonize assessment where we have QC exam questions ready. And that to answer everything that is there in the modular setup of the education and training guidance document with the specific learning outcomes, which are not going to change. So that's wonderful. Then we have got the DOPS, and already that has been mentioned already, but we have got the DOPS templates and the examples by Raphael's group, who actually then contribute to that whole circle of how do you train, how do you assess competence, and how do you reassess competence when that is needed. And then we've got the CPD framework, which will fill in a better way and in a more harmonized way how we recognize competence across member states. And that will answer the CPD question. So for me, it is ETPLAS who facilitates through you, through everybody who uses that material and uses it to the best of their ability to actually achieve the objectives of the EU directive. And I think that is how we should see this. It's tools, they are there, and they're free. Isn't that even better? They're for free. Although sustainability, we talked about, and there needs to be some money coming in. But it is there to actually achieve those objectives, and that is raising animal welfare standards across the EU, a level playing field, and most important for the science and for Europe as a whole, is a free movement of personnel through the mutual recognition. So how does it came about? We had those 2 projects. So that was the pilot and the action grant. And we are very grateful that we got that money and that it was allocated to us and awarded to us. So that was great. And we worked on that in the pilot and in the action grant with working groups. In the first grant period, we had 5 working groups. One was to develop guidance for the assessment criteria of the learning outcomes and the development of a database of assessment criteria. The third working group in that one was there to establish an exam database, a questions database. And there was already as well the establishment of a database of DOPS, and to work on the IT platform to make all that available, plus all the e-modules that were developed through the other calls that were awarded. And the second grant period, functions and those are more towards functions B and C, we expanded actually the activities of working group 1 and 2 in the first grant to working group 1 in the second grant. Second grant also had a continuation of the exam database expansion, also for the functions B and C, the development of a formal training assessment tool, which actually then uses those questions and allows you to have a more harmonized approach to assessment, and continuation of the DOPS, and as a new one, the development of a CPD framework. And then 6 was a continuation of the development of the ETPLAS platform. Here are all the people who worked towards that. So here are all the members, the chairs, and I've indicated the ones with asterisks who actually were on both projects. The bold C's are the ones who were chairs in both grant periods, and the normal C is who was chair in only one of the 2 projects. And I've not mentioned, and she's not listed here, is Anne-Dominique. Thank you very much for a great collaboration during both projects, and I think we could not have done it one without the other, probably. Probably? No. So that went really well, and I thank, obviously, ETPLAS EC for all the support, and Susanna for being the nuisance on the other side of the line. Yes. And yes, thank you. That's it. And so this is really an introduction. The next few talks will be from the chairs of the different working groups, explaining more in detail what their deliverables are all about and how they could be used. Thank you.